Hi, and welcome to our third and final video about news writing. In this short video, we'll be thinking beyond the individual news stories you write. We'll think a bit about where press releases come in, ahead of looking in detail at these next week. And we'll think a bit about bigger picture elements of news writing that are important to bear in mind. So, what if you want your news story to have wider reach than you can give it? For example, through your newsletter or whatever. This is where press releases come in. A press release is a document containing a basic news story and some other information that you provide to a journalist in the hope that they will run your story. We'll look in detail, as I've said, at how to write them next week. But for this week, let's think briefly about the purpose they serve. We need to think about press releases from two perspectives. The perspective of your business or organisation, or the business or organisation you're writing for, and the perspective of journalists. I'm going to share with you some interesting statistics from Lewis and colleagues that tell us a lot about the position of press releases in news provision and about the importance of us writing them well. 60% of quality UK print news, when Lewis et al. were writing, comes from PR material, such as press releases. Stop and think about that for a moment. 60%. It's a big figure, isn't it? The relationship between news media and PR professionals has changed over the years. Journalists simply do not have as much time and scope to go out there searching for news stories. So the stories you provide them with have become their main source. The figures for broadcast news are a bit lower, but still very significant at 34%. However, there's a really striking flip side to this. More than 90% of press releases are never used by the media. Isn't that astounding, given they're such an important source? 90% of the press releases that people send in to journalists are never used. What these statistics tell us is that journalists absolutely want your press releases, but they want your good press releases. Press releases that take account of news values, and so, in the simplest sense, are providing them with a runnable story. And press releases that are skillfully and tightly written so that they have good base material to work with. The statistics reinforce for us how important it is to develop the highest skill level you can for writing press releases. And given the main element of a press release is a basic news story, that starts with being a good news writer. You could view your news writing skills as a building block or foundation for your press release writing skills. And we know that if a building doesn't have good foundations, what we try to build on top of it might be lost. So, get practicing your news writing so that you're ready to build on it next week when you engage with the press release content. I'm sure you're starting to pick up on the fact that news writing for public relations purposes and news writing for journalistic purposes are different. For the purposes of this module, you are coming at news writing from a PR perspective. And it is recognised that you will therefore focus on your business or your organisation's interests. It is, however, important to be aware of the differences. News writing from mainstream news providers must be neutral and balanced. Newspapers have a bit more leeway here because they do have the right to what is called an editorial stance, a political or ideological position from which they are coming at things, whereas public service broadcast media such as the BBC or RTE must aim for complete impartiality. For all news providers, including newspapers though, if the story is on a contentious issue, the key positions in the debate must be presented, and it is best practice to include a quote from each of these key positions. It's very important to note though that balance does not necessarily mean equal balance. For example, If you were writing about climate change, it might be necessary, depending on the story, to mention the position that challenges climate change or climate change in that context that you're writing about. However, this position is taken by an extremely small minority of people, so you do not have to give it equal space to other positions. The same applies with COVID-19 coverage, for example. There are voices that claim the level of risk posed by the disease is small, but there are many, many more voices claiming that the level of risk is high or significant. So, whilst it is good practice to give space or airtime to the different positions, provided they are evidence-based, it is responsible practice to make the amount of coverage proportionate to the number of voices taking each position, if you see what I mean. On this module, we are approaching news writing from a public relations perspective rather than a journalistic perspective, as I said. From a public relations perspective, it is okay if your articles for your own organisation's newsletter highlight your organisation's position, though if the topic is contentious, it is still best practice to flag that up. When you write a press release, your purpose is usually to get good news about your organisation into the mainstream media. It follows that your main focus will be your own organisation or business and voices from within it. When running your story, though, a journalist may well approach people from out with your organisation for quotes, particularly where the topic is contentious. As you go forward on this module and into your placements and careers, always be mindful of the differences between journalistic and public relations approaches to news writing, and of your responsibilities in relation to those. To help you practice, there's a handy news story writing template in this week's application folder. Happy writing, and see you in next week's videos when we'll explore building up and out into press releases and newsletters.